Doctors Jessica Amsbary, Kellen Reid, and Hsiu-Wen Yang. STEM Instructional Strategies for Young Children with Disabilities.
Hello, welcome to our STEM mini chat focused on the STEM Innovation for Inclusion in Early Education Centers, or STEMIES, review of STEM content existing in state early learning guidelines. Why did we think it would be important to review STEM in the ELGs? Well, we know since the 1980s, there's been an increase in standards-based education for grades K through 12. In recent years, this has extended to early care and early childhood education settings. And there have been previous reviews of ELGs, but they focused more on the breadth and depth of the overall standards or as it relates to one particular domain. So for example, there has been an extensive review on mathematics in states' early learning guidelines. And to date, and to our knowledge, there's not yet been a review of ELGs that's focused on science, technology, and engineering. And we know that's important because early childhood practitioners, early interventionists, and early childhood faculty all use the ELGs to inform their curriculum and their practices and their early learning activities for their students. So in beginning our dive into state ELGs, we created 4 different research questions, starting with what percentage of indicators did states themselves identify as science, technology, and engineering? So we wanted to know how many states included main domains titled science, technology, and engineering in their ELGs. And then we wanted to examine what percentage of indicators did our STEMIE team code as science, technology, and engineering based on the definitions we've developed to define those categories. Then we wanted to examine what was the distribution of science, technology, and engineering indicators that we coded. So we were interested in knowing if science, technology, and engineering were equally represented or if there was a predominance of one domain or another. And then our final research question was addressing from which identified ELG domain on the state's ELGs did the science, technology, and engineering indicators that we coded come. So we were interested in understanding where, under what domain in each state's ELG, were we most likely to find indicators related to science, engineering, and technology based on our review. This next slide provides an overview of the method we used to conduct this analysis. We created a review team of STEMIE team members. There were 4 of us, and we were led by Ching Lim. And then our team was Ann Sam, Kellen Reid, Hsiu-Wen Yang, and myself. My name is Jessica Amsbary. We conducted regular meetings to talk through our coding and establish consensus, which I'll talk more about in just a minute. But in all, we examined 52 guidelines. So it was all 50 states plus DC and Head Start's Early Learning Outcomes Framework. In total, that was 30,388 individual indicators that we coded. And we started with a piloting phase with those 3 states. You see Alabama, Delaware, and New Mexico, where all 4 of us coded each of those states, and we got together and talked through our codes and established definitions from those codes for science, technology, and engineering. And after that initial piloting phase, we broke up into pairs of 2 trained coders, alternating who was paired with whom so that we didn't have the same 2 people coding each and every state together. And those 2 trained coders coded independently and then met for a consensus code meeting. When that initial consensus coding between the 2 coders, if there was discrepancies yet, we would bring those to the full group and reach a consensus. And we use this approach, this consensus coding, because it capitalizes on the benefits of analyzing data in a group and was chosen as this method because of its rigor and its trustworthiness of the data that can be generated when using consensus coding. The process does require continuous refinement of definitions in our code book, so it was an ongoing development as we went through. And by the end, we did end up with 100% agreement among all of the codes. So these slides are starting to get into what we found. So this is the representation of science, technology, and engineering in state ELGs as defined by the states. So this is the percentage of states that had a named science domain, technology domain, and engineering domain. So you'll see that 34 states in all, which is 65%, had a science domain, but only 5 states, which is 10%, had a technology domain, and none had engineering as a main domain. You see in this next part of this slide, the total number of indicators was pretty small. So even though there were 1,541 total indicators in our science domain, across all of the indicators, that added up to only 5% being related to science. Technology with only 57 was 0% of the 80-some thousand indicators, and then engineering was also 0%. So this next slide covers the prevalence and distribution of science, technology, and engineering as coded by the STEMIE team. Sorry, I said 80,000, I meant 30,000 in that previous slide. So you see here that we ended up coding 25% of the indicators as science, 20% as engineering, and 11% as technology. And these total numbers translate to each state there was a minimum of 14 items that we coded for science in each state, with a maximum of 384 as science, a minimum of 14 that we coded as engineering with a maximum of 325, and a minimum of 4 that we coded as technology with a maximum of 189. So you'll see that there were 27% more indicators coded into the science domain than the engineering domain, and 131% more in the science domain than the technology domain. And likewise, the engineering indicators outnumbered those coded for technology by 82% on average, despite the absence of states having a named main engineering domain in their ELGs. So our next question pertained to where the ELG indicators that we coded as science, engineering, and technology were within each state's ELG. So you see that primarily our science, technology, and engineering indicators were in those 4 top categories of math, science, approaches to learning, and cognition. And that's the majority, that's 82% of all of the indicators that we coded. So under cognition, there were about 30% of the indicators, 21% in approaches to learning, 16% of all of the indicators in science, which makes sense, and 15% in math. So in the cognition domain, as you can see, contained the greatest proportion of indicators for each STEMIE code and the greatest number of indicators total as compared to all of the other domains. So you see the most science, engineering, and technology, and the most in all under cognition. And then the proportion of codes within the source domains did not vary in a considerable or meaningful way in relatively speaking. So overall, while the majority of states did include a named science domain, and indicators under that domain in their guidelines, there was less focus deemed or identified by the states as technology and engineering domains. Yet when we went through and coded the domains for relevance to science, technology, and engineering, a quarter of all of the indicators could be classified as science related, a fifth as engineering, and about a 10th as technology. And so in our considerations and final thoughts, although we did see that the explicit association of technology and engineering is low based on the fact that states don't often have those domains named as main domains, and the relative number of indicators under the domains if they do exist. Even though that is true, there's evidence from our coding scheme that suggests that these areas are actually included in state early learning guidelines. And perhaps if we were to provide definitions and use that terminology, we could help early childhood practitioners embrace the science, technology, and engineering learning that they're probably already engaging in with their students and children, and therefore lead to better long-term outcomes for our students and families. I will say there's a note on this slide that is worth noting, is that we coded the ELGs based on main domains. So a lot of domains had subdomains and subdomains, and oftentimes within those subdomains and subdomains, engineering did fall or technology did fall. But I think it would be more recognized and more embraced if they were main domains, and perhaps leading to more integration of STEM in early learning environments. And then finally, our next step in this review process is to go back through these indicators and code them for quality. And so figure out the high quality and figure out where those high quality indicators are. And that is our next step. So thank you all for attending this STEM mini chat. Please contribute to the discussion board as you are able. We look forward to questions and comments, and enjoy STEMIEFest. Thank you.